Welcome to Cinematic Recaps. Today we're diving into the 2016 sci-fi romance movie titled Passengers by director Morten Tyldum. So buckle up, folks, because spoilers are ahead. The Starship Avalon is traveling through space, making its way to the colony world of Homestead 2. The command room is empty. The ship is traveling on autopilot, and all its 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers are hibernating. Suddenly, the ship passes through an asteroid belt that begins to weaken its shield. The impact protocol is initiated, and power is diverted to the main shield, but the ship is on a collision course with the asteroids. The ship collides with a giant asteroid, causing malfunctions, and Pod 1498 is activated. James Preston, a Rate 2 mechanical engineer, is awakened. He opens his eyes in a state of confusion, and an automated system tells him he spent 120 years in suspended animation. She tells him the ship is 4 months away from its final destination and that he has all the time to enjoy all the luxuries on the spaceship. Jim receives instructions about his ID band and is directed to his cabin number, where he's told about the activities he'll be part of. Excited and nervous to meet all the new people, he prepares himself and leaves for the lesson. Jim walks into an automated class meant for the entire group. He looks anxious, seeing he's the only one taking the lesson. The hologram explains Earth is the cradle of civilization, but it's overpopulated, overpriced, and overrated. It tells him to hold his questions till the end of the lesson, but he keeps asking why he's the only one present. Realizing it can't answer his questions, Jim runs off to the elevator and makes his way to the Grand Concourse. There he finds an automated desk and asks to speak to a person in charge. It directs him to the steward at level 3. He gets there and sees no one. He runs back and asks to speak with the captain of the ship. It tells him the captain can be found in the bridge in the command ring. When he gets to the bridge, though he can't enter, he sees there's no one inside. He makes his way to the observatory and asks the AI in charge to show him Homestead 2. It tells him they'll arrive in 90 years, 3 weeks and 1 day. It also tells him they left Earth 30 years ago. He realizes he woke up too soon and runs back to the Grand Concourse and sends a message to the customer helpline back on Earth. He's told his message through the overpriced call to Earth will arrive in 19 years, and the earliest reply will be in 36 years, making it 55 years before he gets a response. Jim is heartbroken. He walks around and finds a bar. There he meets another person, and the fellow offers to get him a drink. When he goes to get it, Jim realizes it's an android. Its name is Arthur. He tries to find out from Arthur why he's awake early, but the android has no clue. Jim wakes up the next morning and goes to the cafeteria, where he realizes most of the things on the menu are for gold-class passengers. He gets lunch coffee and tries to figure out how to repair his hibernation pod. He grabs all the tools and manages to turn it back on. Quickly, he rushes in and nothing happens, but he has a hard time getting out. Next, he uses the tools he can find to get into the crew's hibernation chamber. But that doesn't work. This causes malfunctions around the ship. Jim returns to the bar to grab a drink and to talk with Arthur about his dying of old age on the ship alone. Arthur gives him a bit of advice, and he decides to break into the V&S suite of the ship reserved for gold-class passengers and have himself some fun. He tries all the games, drinks, and foods available. As time passes, Jim becomes more miserable being alone. He gets drunk and wanders around the hibernation chamber when he stumbles upon a room with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. Jim gets into one of the suits and goes to the airlock door. He activates the magnetic boots and presses a button to open the airlock door. Once outside the ship, Jim's mesmerized by the stunning view and deactivates the magnets on his boots, floating into space, utterly heartbroken. He gets back into the ship, takes off the suit, walks back into the airlock, pulls down the lever, and is ready to end it all, but is unable. He runs back into the hibernation chamber and slips on a bottle. He stands up and sees a woman in one of the hibernation chambers named Aurora Lane and is instantly drawn to her. He goes to the Grand Concourse and listens to her passenger interview. The next morning, he sits next to her pod and continues listening to her interviews while having breakfast. Later, he goes to the bar and talks to Arthur about Aurora being the perfect woman. Jim continues to watch her interviews and gets the idea of waking her up. He quickly goes to see Arthur and asks his opinion on the matter, but Arthur offers him no help. As the days go by, Jim keeps going to see Arthur, thinking of whether to wake Aurora up or let her be. One day, Jim makes his decision, shaves his beard, and goes to wake her up. He grabs his tools and opens up a corner of her pod. This turns on power inside the pod and activates her heart. As she wakes up going through the same process as he did, Jim hides away, hurriedly packs up his tools, and runs off to his room. Later, Jim goes to the Grand Concourse and finds Aurora there, confused just as he was a year ago. He tells her they're the only ones awake and takes her to the observatory. Jim takes her outside the crew hibernation chamber and tells her everything that controls the ship is behind the door and he can't get in. He tells her he's been awake for 1 year and 3 weeks. She freaks out and runs back to the passenger hibernation chamber, searching for her pod. When they find it, Jim tells her there are no special equipments on the ship that can help them get back into hibernation. They go back on the Grand Concourse, and Jim tells Aurora she needs to rest since she just got out of hibernation and needs at least 3 days to fully recover. He offers to walk her to her cabin, but she tells him it's fine, feeling sorry for him, having to spend all that time alone on the ship. Next, he goes to the bar feeling regretful for what he has done and asks Arthur to keep it a secret. The next morning, she wakes up and goes to the automated info desk in the Grand Concourse and asks if there is a way to put someone who's woken up back into hibernation, but it tells her the hibernation pods never malfunctions. Jim joins her and takes her for breakfast as they leave the info desk malfunctions and goes off. At breakfast, Aurora realizes Jim's been having the same breakfast for over a year and gets him something on the gold class menu. They discuss the possibility of going back into hibernation. Jim tells her he's tried everything and there's no other way. She searches through the infirmary looking for anything that could help, going through research documents on hibernation and finally trying to break open the doors of the crew's hibernation chamber. Jim takes a walk and notices more malfunctions on the ship. Days later, Aurora opens up a new file and starts writing about her time on the ship. She goes for jogs and takes a swim in the pool, slowly accepting her fate. Later, she goes to the cafeteria and interviews Jim, thinking his story will be most interesting. She asks why he gave up his life on Earth. He tells her he needed a fresh start and a place to rebuild his life. They both take a walk through the pods chamber and talk about the profits the Homestead Company makes from the colony business. He tells her he didn't pay full price for his ticket. Aurora tells him all she sees in the pods are zeros for the Homestead Company and that she knows people well. Jim decides to test her good she is at reading people just looking at their faces. At lunch, Aurora finally tells Jim her reason for being on the ship. She has a round-trip ticket and plans to go to Homestead 2, live there for a year or two, and go back to Earth and become the first journalist to have ever done so and write about her story of humanity's flight to the stars, a story like no other. She gets bored with her situation and asks Jim what he does for fun. He takes her dancing, playing basketball, and to the cinema. Jim then takes her to the bar for a drink and she meets Arthur. She enjoys their company for a bit until she remembers her situation and retires to bed. Jim and Arthur are left behind feeling awful for what's happened to her. Jim tinkers with his equipment. Later, Aurora walks into the observatory to find a cup of coffee and a miniature of the Chrysler building he made for her. Jim walks in and sees Aurora swimming in the pool and waves at her. Later, he attaches a camera to one of the robots and sends it out to deliver a dinner invitation to Aurora. The robot delivers her reply, and he's happy. Later, he goes to her cabin to pick her up and is stunned by her beauty. They go to the bar for a drink and later have dinner. After dinner, they stay talking about their lives. She tells him her dad was a war reporter who died of a heart attack when she was 17, and that she grew up reading about herself in his books. Jim gets carried away and tells her he likes hearing about her life. Later, he takes her to the airlock. She is scared and asks him if it's safe. She asks him to turn around while she takes off her dress to put on the spacesuit. They go outside and Jim switches off their boot magnets, telling her to trust him. They float into space and have a romantic moment together. They come back inside and start kissing later. Jim takes her to his cabin and they clap. The next morning at breakfast, Jim looks into her eyes and tells Aurora she's the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. She walks over to the table and starts kissing him. They clap. Aurora moves into Jim's cabin and they start living as a couple. She continues writing about their life on the Avalon. They go for jogs, eat together, and continue clapping. The next day, Jim explores the Avalon and finds the hydroponics chamber and gets Aurora rose flowers. The Avalon passes by the star Arcturus, and they both run to the observatory to view it. Aurora thinks it's amazing and calls it the Red Giant. Later, they go to one of the many restaurants to celebrate Aurora's birthday, and then to the bar for a birthday drink. Aurora tells Arthur there are no secrets between her and Jim. Jim goes to the washroom and admires the ring he made for Aurora. Aurora stays chatting with Arthur, who tells her Jim spent months contemplating whether to wake her up, and he finally did. Jim walks in, and Aurora asks him if it's true. He tells her it is, and she cries in disbelief, tells him to stay away from her, and walks to Jim's cabin. Jim comes back to his cabin and is sad to see Aurora's moved out. The next day in the cafeteria, he walks up to her, and the moment he speaks, she walks away. At night, while Jim's asleep, Aurora walks in and starts punching him and kicking him. She picks up a crowbar to kill him, but changes her mind. The next day, while she jogs, Jim speaks to her over the comms, and she's been avoiding him. He tries to apologize, telling her there's no excuse for what he did, but she screams, telling Jim she doesn't care. He took her life. Later, while Jim is in his suite, another malfunction occurs. The Avalon faces critical diagnostics, and the command shuts down. Aurora goes to the bar for a drink and tells Arthur she envies him because he's always happy and has a purpose. Just then, Jim walks in and tells Aurora Tuesday is his day with Arthur. She corrects him, it's Wednesday, empties her glass, and walks away. She goes to her suite and watches videos of her friends' recordings to her. Later, she goes to the passenger pod chamber and lies in her pod. The next morning, she walks into the grand concourse and sees Jim has planted a tree. Jim is in the elevator and it malfunctions. Aurora goes to have breakfast and the food dispensary also malfunctions. Jim tries to get out of the elevator and falls. Just then they hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms asking who planted a tree on his ship. They both run into the grand concourse and find Mancuso, Gus, standing by the tree. He asks who did it and Jim tells him he hid. Again he asks who else is awake and how far they are from Homestead 2. And they answer. Gus doesn't understand how their pods failed since the company assured them no pod could fail. He takes them to the command center where they discover multiple malfunctions on the ship, though it's still on course. Gus tells them the information on the ship has to be checked manually. They leave the bridge to the grand concourse, and a robot almost falls on their heads. Jim tells Gus the robots have been breaking down recently. Gus gives them instructions on how to collect data and assign them to their units. He goes to the pods chamber and checks on the pods. Jim joins him there. Gus finds out what happened to the pods and tells Jim Aurora's pod did not malfunction. Jim tells him he opened it and Aurora knows about it, but Gus doesn't think it was the right thing to do. Gus is at the command center with Aurora. They talk about what Jim did to her, and she tells him Jim committed murder. He tells her there's nothing they can do. Just then Jim walks in with a robot. Gus starts coughing, and Aurora tells him to go have a rest. As he walks out of the bridge, he coughs out blood. At night, Aurora isn't at peace and goes for a swim. The ship loses power and gravity, and everything on the ship begins to float. The water starts floating and carries Aurora with it, and she starts drowning, going unconscious. The ship reboots and gravity is restored. She barely survives. They both run to find the deck chief. The three of them are at the bridge where they find out the ship started having a malfunction 2 years ago after hitting something big and taking out major systems, which was the cause of Jim's pod malfunction. They need to find and fix the main cause of the malfunctions, as the ship will lose life support if the malfunctions continue. They go to find out where, since the diagnosis is off, they have to do it manually. Suddenly, Gus faints. They take him to the infirmary and run a scan. The data shows he has 612 disorders. He has progressive organ failure with no treatment that can extend his life. He's given sedatives to help him, but he ignores them. Gus goes to have a minute alone in his cabin. The ship begins to face difficulties in flight. Jim and Aurora run to find Gus. They meet him in the observatory. There he hands over his ID bracelet to Jim, telling him to use it and get to where they need to go and fix the ship, and he perishes. Suddenly, the lights go off and an alarming red light turns on. Jim tells Aurora he needs her help. As they run to engineering, the ship has another gravity surge. They pass by the bar and see Arthur malfunctioning. Jim runs over the bar and disconnects. They arrive at engineering, and Aurora asks if they can wake some of the crew. Jim tells her they don't have the time. They get to the power plant and try to open it, but it's stocked. Jim hacks into it, and it opens, sucking Aurora in. In the power plant, there's a hole caused by the impact of the asteroid. Jim gets sucked in, but manages to hold onto the hatch as it closes on him. He uses his leg to push the pad to Aurora, and she immediately closes the hole, while Jim gets a gum and seals it shut. Immediately, they discover there's more than one hole in the ship. They follow the trajectory made by the meteor and make their way to the reactor control computer. There's a hole in it. Aurora asks him how they can fix it, and she says they're going to die. Jim tells her there's a replacement part for everything. They find the replacement part and fix the control computer. The system tries to vent the reactor but fails. Jim does it manually but fails again. The outer door is jammed and they have to open it from the outside to cool the reactor down. They go to the airlock room and Jim gets ready to move out. He gives Aurora Gus's bracelet, saying she might need it. As Jim makes his way through the door, Aurora tells him to come back to her, saying she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora is back at the reactor, where the temperature has reached critical levels. A bolt from the reactor breaks off and propels into her arm, and she falls to the ground, telling Jim it's nothing. Jim gets to the door and it won't open. He has to bypass it. He opens the door, but it won't stay open. He tells her he has to wait and hold the door open. Aurora begs him to come back in so they can figure something else out, as venting the reactor will kill him. He tells her there are 5,000 people on the Avalon whose lives depend on them, and she pulls the lever and vents the reactor. The fumes travel through a narrow tunnel to the door where Jim is and push him into space, breaking his tether. He's almost sucked in by the engine, but manages to escape. The pressure in his suit is dropping, he tells Aurora, and she hurries to get into a suit and come save him. He apologizes to her. She gets into a suit and floats out to get him, but her tether is too short and she's pulled back. She suddenly grabs onto his tether and pulls him in. Aurora drags Jim into the infirmary and runs a scan. The autodoc tells her he's dead. She uses Gus's bracelet and overrides the protocols, giving multiple commands to the autodoc. It carries out the procedures and successfully revives him. She quickly climbs onto the pod, kissing him. Later, Aurora fixes Arthur's bruises and Jim takes a look at the medical pod. She and Jim later give Gus a befitting space burial. Later, Jim tells her the command mode of the medical pod has an option called Stabilize and Suspend, which stops all metabolic activities. They can use it as a hibernation pod. He tells her to get in the pod and make it to the end of the journey, accomplishing what she set out to do. Later, Jim goes to the bar and is discussing with Arthur when suddenly Aurora walks in, telling him it's her day with Arthur. Jim shows her the ring he made for her and proposes to her. Jim is seen swimming with Aurora for the first time, and they live their lives on the Avalon. 88 years later, the Avalon arrives at Homestead 2. The wake-up process is initiated, and the crew walks into the grand concourse and is surprised at what they see. Aurora leaves a message for the rest of the crew and passengers, retelling her and Jim's story while the rest were asleep. The end.